There's a kind of force in this world that doesn't knock on doors. It doesn't ask for attention. It simply rearranges the room by existing. Most men never learn it because most men are trained to chase, to impress, to speak before they even understand what they feel. But there comes a moment when a man no longer seeks to win. He no longer plays to be chosen. He becomes something rarer, a presence that changes the equation, not by addition, but by tension. And once you understand the source of that tension, you'll begin to see why some men create obsession not through effort, but through the weight of restraint. You've been pulled here for a reason. You might not fully understand it yet, but before this ends, you will. Welcome to Stoic Courage. Power isn't always about presence. Sometimes it's about what you don't give. A man who offers too much too soon becomes invisible, not because he lacks value, but because he spends it like loose change. In the realm of influence, what is rare becomes radiant. What is restrained becomes remembered. And so the question is not, what should you say to her? But rather, what are you giving away without even knowing it? Your attention, your time, your emotional transparency? High-value men do not starve others of connection. They simply stop bleeding their essence into every interaction. They measure their presence the way a sculptor handles clay, with intention, not impulse. The mind of a woman isn't obsessed with clarity. It's haunted by ambiguity. And nothing creates ambiguity like a man who sees, but doesn't always respond, knows, but doesn't always reveal, feel, but refuses to collapse into every moment of expression. In a world addicted to exposure, what you withhold becomes power. The modern world worships explanation. Everything must be labeled, categorized, defined. But desire doesn't live in definitions. It lives in the mog, in the half smile, in the moment when she thought she understood you and then realized she didn't. Mystery is not a mask. It is a reflection of a man who doesn't put his soul on display. You don't need to be confusing. You need to be complex. Complexity is built through lived experience, through restraint, heartbreak, solitude, and silence. And women don't fall in love with facts. They fall in love with possibility. A man who is fully known can be safely categorized. A man who leaves questions cannot be controlled. When she doesn't know where she stands, but still feels drawn to be near you. That's not game. That's gravity. And gravity isn't loud. It doesn't chase. It just pulls. Be the man who is not always clear, but always felt. Certainty is comfort, but comfort rarely creates desire. When she knows you'll always reply, always be available, always bend just enough, something inside her rests, but rest is not what awakens her. Rest is what dulls her senses. Scarcity is not about pretending to be busy. It's not about avoiding her calls or acting uninterested. It's about having a life so rich, so full, so in motion, that you don't need to manufacture distance. It already exists. The man who is truly rare is not rare because he hides. He is rare because he is becoming, because his time is not spent in chase, but in pursuit of something higher. She cannot pin him down, not because he's avoiding her, but because he's moving towards something she cannot name. Scarcity is not absence. It's the presence of purpose. And in a world where most men orbit her, the one who walks his own path becomes the storm she didn't see coming. Influence doesn't begin with dominance. It begins with direction. In most interactions, the frame is quietly surrendered, handed over through over-explaining, emotional overreach, or need for approval. And once that frame is lost, so is the gravity. True presence doesn't seek to impress. It defines the atmosphere. No loud gestures, no performance, just stillness that shifts the dynamic without saying a word. While one voice rises, another remains unmoved. Not because it lacks emotion, but because it refuses to be pulled into chaos. Leadership begins here, when a man becomes the context, not the reaction. Energy isn't scattered. Boundaries are not verbal. They're felt, and the room starts adjusting accordingly. This isn't about silencing others. It's about becoming so aligned within that no storm outside can bend the frame. Control isn't a grip, it's a stance. And in that still, unwavering posture, attraction takes root without effort. Some bonds are broken not with words, but with silence that no longer waits. Not a punishment, not a warning. Just a quiet decision to return to the self, where peace lives undisturbed. Detachment isn't the absence of feeling. It's the refusal to bleed for what no longer nourishes. There is strength in stepping back without resentment, in leaving, not with anger, but with awareness. The world misunderstands this stillness, calls it cold, calls it distant. But there's a rare kind of fire that burns inward, a warmth that doesn't chase light because it already glows from within. To detach is not to abandon. It is to return to what cannot be taken. Inner stillness, sacred focus, quiet power. And once rooted in that, no touch unsettles, no absence wounds, no chaos enters. The world pushes, and most respond by pushing back. A raised voice meets another. A sharp look triggers defense. A cold silence, answered with colder distance. And so it spirals. But there's another path, one less traveled, quieter, infinitely more powerful. Not everything demands an answer. Not every shift deserves a counter. Sometimes what unsettles most is the absence of a predictable response. In that space, something new emerges. Not noise, but presence. Not the kind that seeks attention, but the kind that anchors the room. Words become few, movements deliberate, energy intact. The mind calms not because the storm ends, but because someone stops sailing into it. This is not passivity, this is choice. A discipline forged in fire, to stand still while the world moves around, and never once lose center. There's a strange truth in human nature. What feels certain fades. The mind adjusts to what it can predict. It begins to dull where there is no mystery left to solve. And yet introduce uncertainty, not chaos, but depth unspoken, and the heart leans in. Not because of fear, but because it senses something rare, an inner world not given away easily. When a man no longer needs to be understood, when he stops translating his soul into fragments of approval, something shifts. Presence becomes less of a performance and more of a pulse. Subtle, steady, undeniable. In that distance, attraction doesn't die, it sharpens. Because what isn't owned becomes endlessly imagined, and what cannot be fully held is what many never stop reaching for. You don't need to be louder, just still and certain. We'll speak again. In silence, that means more than words. Welcome to Stoic Courage.